All right, good to go whenever you are.
Hi, I'm Beth.
And I'm Courtney.
Welcome to Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story.
And today we're talking about the time bubonic plague came to San Francisco.
I'm so excited.
Don't you think it's weird, Beth, that we don't ever hear about this? Like, did you ever learn in school or did you know that we had bubonic plague in the city of San Francisco?
No.
Don't you think that is something we should cover instead
And
of maybe?
I grew up in the Bay Area where it seems worth a mention.
Yeah, I grew up in Foster City. We didn't learn about this. Might have been better to do this than the fucking mission dioramas.
I was thinking last night about this, how growing up in California, our history lessons were a little off kilter.
So dumb. So dumb.
A little whitewashed.
Yeah, I remember going to Sutter's Fort and them being like, "This was a great place," and then you become an adult and you're like,
"This was
terrible."
He was like the Swiss California Hitler. I probably shouldn't say that. He was real bad. He was a bad guy.
Perhaps a topic for a future episode.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sure there's some burials out there we don't know about. You know what, Caroline? I was thinking about the time. Trying to think back, when did I first hear that we had plague in San Francisco? And Carolyn, I think you were there. Remember that fucking San Francisco horror, San Francisco terror thing that was at Fisherman's Wharf that we went to so many years ago?
Yeah, I think that's probably the first time I heard about it.
We went, you guys, there used to be this thing down at the Fisherman's Wharf, and we went, Karen and I went, and it was like this historical San Francisco, it wasn't like a haunted house, but it was like a interactive experience about the worst parts of the Barbary coast. They had
it was like Ripley's
Shanghai, people getting Shanghaied. Yeah. They had Alcatraz, and then they had the plague, because I remember there was a room full of rats. There's going to be a lot of rats in this episode, you guys. I'm so sorry. More rats than the pest house, if you can believe it. We had, honest to God, bubonic plague in San Francisco in 1900. It killed about 200 people. And it is a really fascinating, pretty gross chapter of our history. And I am super excited to tell you about it today. As you know, Beth, yours too, plague is one of my special interests. One of my special hobbies.
I know. It's funny. I know so much more about the plague in London than I do in San Francisco. So I'm excited to hear this.
Well, that is why we're doing a podcast episode about it. Let me tell you, before we start, I'll tell you what my sources are. My main source is this really great book that came out a few years ago called The Barbary Plague, The Black Death in Victorian San Francisco by Marilyn Chase. I think another book has come out since then. I'll put that in the notes, but this is the one that I read. In addition to my extensive amateur plague knowledge that I have. That's the other source. Okay, so I think one of the reasons maybe that we don't hear that much about it is that it didn't actually kill that many people. It killed 190 people, which is a lot of people. But compared historically to the numbers that bubonic plague put up, this was nothing.
Yeah.
There are a couple of different reasons. We can get into it, but the one that Marilyn Chase puts forward is that the fleas in California are actually different from the ones that were in Asia and Europe, and that made the disease less lethal.
Wow.
There are some other theories that Beth, the book, The Great Mortality, which we've both read about the Black Death.
Love that book.
It's a good book. He talks about how actually, even though conditions were not great around the late 1800s, they were much better than they were in the 1300s, and that's why fewer people died.
Well, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but wasn't the idea partly that the first rounds of plague killed off all the people that didn't have any, like, that they were biologically more susceptible,
Oh,
and that the
that's
people who
interesting.
survived may have
I don't
passed
know.
on some of their different immune system. I don't know.
That's super interesting. I mean, that's definitely possible. We're going to get into a little bit later how they thought that actually Chinese people were just
Oh my God.
ethnically
Of course they
susceptible
did.
to bubonic plague, which is not what you're
No.
saying, Beth. To be clear, but there are that's an interesting theory, and there's probably some merit to it. So most people probably know something about the bubonic plague. It's like pretty famous. There were 3 major plague pandemics in the world that we know of. The first one was the plague of Justinian, which was in the Eastern Roman Empire in 541 AD. And I recently learned that they actually have confirmed that through DNA testing, like testing the bones and the remains to see if the plague was present there, and they found it. The second is the most famous one, which is the Black Death of 1347. That was the pandemic that wiped out not most of Europe, was mostly in Europe and the Middle East. And then the third pandemic was the Asian pandemic from 1855 to 1927. And this is the pandemic that led to the outbreak in California. Each one of these killed millions of people. But like I said, like San Francisco, only 190 people died, which is 190 is a lot of people, but not anywhere near what was happening in Asia at the time.
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, in that second wave that you were talking about, the Black Death, it was like a third to a half of Europe's population.
Yeah. So the Justinian plague killed, they estimate 25 to 50 million people. And that's just the eastern part of the Roman Empire. The Black Death, they estimate 25 to 30 million people, which was up to one third to one half of Europe's population at the time. And then the Asian pandemic, which was happening mostly in India and China, killed 12 to 15 million people. There was a lot of people died. And this is one of the kind of puzzling parts of why it had such a limited effect in San Francisco. And we'll get into this later, but it never really escaped San Francisco proper. There were a few cases that got over to Oakland, but mostly it was contained here, which
Interesting.
is very unusual considering how the Black Death spread so quickly through Europe. Bubonic plague, just to get the basics out of the way, is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. This is
one of my
Beth's
favorite names ever.
This is Beth's favorite bacteria.
It's just such an elegant name.
It
I don't
really
know.
is. And I think it is named after the man who discovered the actual bacillus.
Of course it is.
Yersin. Yersinia pestis. That's like the dream, right? Is to have like potentially the most horrendous disease that mankind has ever known. Named
that,
after you.
and it would be like an amazing goth drag name, I think.
Oh, call the Boulet brothers. We got a new one. The conventional way that this disease spread was among humans via rats and fleas. So the flea is the actual vector, the creature that is carrying the bacteria, and it bites on and feeds on all kinds of mammals, including people. During bubonic plague outbreaks, the fleas jump from rat to human and then from human to human, which spreads the plague. Famously, there were always a lot of dead rats around before people noticed plague, right? The harbinger of the plague is a bunch of dead rats.
Wasn't it other animals too, like cats and dogs?
So it actually, going back to the Great Mortality, we'll put that book in the notes too. I think it originated in marmots in Central Asia. So any type of mammal can be infected with it. It's just that like in crowded areas, the fleas will feed on the rats, and then when the rats die, they're looking for something else. And a lot of times it's people. So they bite people and spread it. Because ships carry a lot of rats, the plague spread along shipping lines, which caused massive pandemics, which is how the Black Death started, and then how the Asian pandemic spread here to California along shipping lines.
Right. Didn't it come into port in Italy?
Yeah,
in like
Venice,
13,
famously, yes. And then it comes in to Hawaii is how it gets into San Francisco. There are a bunch of different forms of plagues. They're all super hideous, and they all have high death rates. An infected person would usually develop like these big nodules called buboes on their armpits or groin or neck. And when they became necrotic or septic, they would turn black, which is where we get the term the Black Death, the Black Plague. Actually, during the 1347 pandemic, the Black Death, they called that the Great Mortality. Like contemporary sources called it the Great Mortality. We look back and call it the Black Death. Like I said, the plague was in Asia. It was in China and India. And the first case that we know of in the United States came to Hawaii. It came in to Honolulu aboard a Japanese ship that was actually supposed to go on to San Francisco. A Chinese sailor had died aboard, and physicians in Hawaii suspected that it was plague. And they tested it, and it was plague. They tested the corpse, excuse me. This was in, I guess I should give you some dates. This was in 1899, 1900. The officials in Hawaii quarantined the ship, but you can't quarantine rats, right? Rats run aboard the ropes that tie the ships to this. I told you there's going to be so much rat knowledge dropped in this episode. Rats, they run along the ropes, and they come into town and they spread plague. Of course, like here in San Francisco, the Chinatown in Honolulu was close to the wharf, and the first case of plague on the island happened in Chinatown. And we talked about this in the Pest House episode, but we're going to get into a lot of anti-Chinese xenophobia and racism in this episode as well. Lots of rats and lots of racism. Officials in Honolulu blamed Chinatown and Chinese immigrants for the plague.
I mean, they well knew by then that rats were the vector and fleas were the vector for this disease.
Yes.
And those rats could have gone anywhere in Honolulu. They just happened to go to Chinatown.
They just happened to, because like I said, Chinese immigrants were ethnically susceptible to the plague, a thing that they actually believed. And one of the reasons they had for this is they said that the diet, they ate too many vegetables. Somebody call RFK Jr. right now and tell him.
Too many vegetables.
Too many vegetables, and you might get bubonic plague.
On that note, I saw an ad for something today that is called Meat Stock. That is organized by Make America Healthy Again. And it's like a conference for like all of these like meat influencers, you know, like the dude who only eats like beef liver chips or whatever.
Oh, like
and
Liver
it's
King?
Meat producers and meat influencers meeting together.
Wow, what could go? It's like the 8th level of hell right there, right? We're putting all the demons in one place. After plague was discovered in Chinatown in Honolulu, things were fine. Just kidding. They burned Chinatown to the ground.
But specify who's they in this situation. Was it
the white man, Beth? No,
government decision or vigilantes?
It was a government decision.
Okay.
And what happened was, so first they instituted a military quarantine around the area. And then what they initially tried to do was do a controlled burn of certain parts of it, but the burn got out of control and 5,000 people lost their homes. So it was really bad, but it was the government. It was the fire department who was supposed to be setting the fire, but it got out of control. I mean, they did use burning a lot back then. This is clearly, I'll put a link to the book I read in the notes. There's a whole book about it. It's clearly motivated by like racism and outmoded ideas and biases and all that stuff. But they did use burning back then to try to control things like this. This is why they had to burn down San Francisco General City and County Hospital the first time because it was infested with fleas and rats. And the only remedy they had was burning. So in 1900, a ship called the Australia, which was sailing from Honolulu, docked at Angel Island. Officials there were on the lookout for plague. They knew it could be coming. So they quarantined the ship and inspected it. But they did not catch all the rats, which were on the ship and hopped off and got into the city. Once again, here come the rats, right? There were no dead bodies on the ship, but there were plenty of rats, and some of them had plague. The Australia arrived on New Year's Day, 1900, and the first plague death in San Francisco was reported on March 6th. So about 3 months.
That's a long delay.
It does seem like a long time, doesn't it? It's possible that people got the plague and didn't die. It's also, as we're going to find out, because of the fear and the sort of like threatened violence that came with this, people often hid plague victims from authorities. So it's possible that there was an earlier case, but that they didn't tell the authorities, or the authorities didn't find out about it because they didn't want to bring the wrath of the city down yet again on Chinatown.
Well, my gears are turning. I'm like, if somebody died of plague after 1901 in San Francisco, they could not legally be buried in San Francisco. So if they were hiding bodies, where are they?
It's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. Well, I do have kind of an answer. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but they were also smuggling people with plague and bodies out of Chinatown to Sacramento. So, but Sacramento, as far as we know, didn't get the plague. So, so it first broke out in Chinatown for the same reason that it first broke out in Chinatown in Honolulu. It was the area closest to the wharf. We'll post a map in the show notes, but the coastline and the configuration of the city was much different in 1900. And we've talked about this before on this show. Portsmouth Square, which is sort of like, as we know in San Francisco, kind of the entrance to Chinatown on the east side, Beth?
Yeah.
Was right by the water, and the wharves ran straight to Chinatown. It
is there in the name, isn't it? Portsmouth.
It's right there, Portsmouth. The mouth of the port.
Exactly.
So conditions in Chinatown were also ripe for a plague outbreak. Chinatown was a racial ghetto at the time. Chinese immigrants had to live there, meaning it was very crowded. They were not allowed to live anywhere else. They had to live within the prescribed boundaries of Chinatown. Also, because of racist city policies, the area had fewer services. Quality of life was not great. It was full of haphazard tenement housing, and everything was made of wood. So if you remember from the Pest House episode, rats love wood. Girl, I don't know what it is, but they love it. So wood, trash, poverty, and crowded conditions are like primo rat real estate specs, right? That's what they want. And then, of course, with the rats come the fleas, and with the fleas come the bubonic plague. The first person to die of plague in San Francisco was living at the Globe Hotel, which was a tenement-style building in Chinatown. The death was verified by autopsy. At the time, Yersinia pestis, it had been discovered. In 1894, they identified the bacteria. Like you said, Beth, they knew. Yersin, I think his name was, identified the bacteria. They knew what it looked like. They had microscopes. They knew the symptoms, and so the coroner or the medical officials verified that it was plague, but they still didn't understand exactly how it was transmitted. I don't think they knew that it was fleas. They knew rats were involved, but they didn't know all the details. There were also a lot of kind of like bad economic conditions going on at the time. The city was coming out of an economic depression, and we were deep in the yellow peril era, right? This is like peak racism. They called it yellow peril. And we talked about the Chinese Exclusion Act in the Pest House episode. Chinese immigrants are blamed for most, if not all, disease outbreaks in the city. Our mayor at the time, James Phelan, campaigned for the Chinese Exclusion Act, so he was on board. We also had at this time the Working Men's Party, which is Victorian MAGA. Let's be clear. And their slogan, once again, let's be clear, their slogan was Keep America White. And they were Victorian MAGA. I'll say it again for the third fucking time. You guys pay attention to history. Okay, yeah. Swear to God. That's why we do this podcast. They were very active and campaigning. And I don't know if Phelan was a member of this party, but he was certainly aligned. A common belief at the time of the Asian pandemic was that Chinese and Indian people were more susceptible to the plague. One of the reasons they thought this was because fewer members of the colonial elite in Asia got the plague or died of it. And of course, this is because they lived totally segregated from local people in much better conditions with better hygiene, better food, you name it, they had it.
Fewer rats.
Fewer rats, and they also wore more clothing, right? These were like British colonialists with their fucking pith helmets and their tall ass boots and whatever. So they were like less likely to get flea bites. And they just had nicer houses and, access to better stuff. So it's no surprise this far in the episode that the city immediately blockaded Chinatown, right? Immediately. Just like in Honolulu, they had cops out there. They strung ropes around it and used wagons to block it. And it was blockaded for 3 days before they finally got their shit together. Most of the workers in the city were Chinese immigrants who lived in Chinatown. So part of the pushback against the blockade was that people needed their servants and their workers. At the time all of this is going on, the person in charge of the anti-plague efforts was named Joseph Kenyon, and he was the head of the Marine Hospital Service in San Francisco. Beth, I know you know a lot about the Marine Hospital Service in San Francisco. Would you like to say a word?
I do. The first Marine Hospital in San Francisco was set up on Rincon Point, which is no longer a point. Yeah. It's like Soma, Rincon Hill area, right on the water, and it was damaged, I believe, by an earthquake in the 1860s, and then they opened it in a new location in the Presidio. Both sites had cemeteries so these were hospitals for soldiers or sailors who came into the city who were ill on the boats that they came in on, and either they got better or they died. I guess those are the two outcomes in any case. But there was a cemetery. There was a cemetery at the Rincon Point site that may or may not have been moved. We never know. And there's definitely a cemetery at the Presidio site where actually all of the remains are still there. And there's a nice little viewing spot with a memorial. It's a whole long story. Maybe we'll tell it someday.
We surely will, because it is a good story. And that memorial is pretty new.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But one of the reasons I perked up is because after that Marine Hospital closed, the building was used for a number of different things, and one of them was a plague lab for a while. I think it was much after this period that you're talking about. I think it was 30s, 40s, something like that. But
that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, there is another connection there.
There are going to be some plague labs in this episode too. Oh, wait. I'm not going to tell you. I don't want to ruin the surprise. One of them is It's really good. Okay, so here's what was going on. You guys, again, like the more things change, no one wanted to admit that there was plague in San Francisco. This was bad for business, okay? They did not want there to be plague here. Government officials, newspapers, and business leaders were conspiring to deny it and cover it up. The newspapers, it's interesting, they kind of swung between these two extremes in this early period of plague in the city. They would either make fun of the overreaction, like, oh, there's no plague, because, or they would like accuse the Chinese immigrants of trying to kill us all, right?
That
So,
sounds so familiar.
God, I know, it's so weird. What doesn't it remind you of anything?
It does make me wonder, though. I mean, we in 2025 are closer to plague in San Francisco in 1900 than either period was to the 1340s
Yeah.
plague. So I'm wondering, like, what was their awareness of the fatality, the mortality of what happened in the Middle Ages versus what we know now?
That's a good question. I do not have an answer to that. I think they were much closer at this time to what was going on in Asia.
Mhm.
And like I said, because the colonial elites in Asia were not dying, that was a part of the theory behind why, like, oh, well, white people aren't going to get this. This is a disease of, the Asiatics is the term they were using. So I don't know about the Middle Ages. I think they were probably looking more closely at what was going on in Asia at the time, which at 12 to 15 million people died. That's a lot of people, right? It was
Yeah,
really
and
bad.
they must have been getting news reports, particularly because of the such large Chinese community in San Francisco.
Yeah, and we had like a very active trade going back and forth across the Pacific, right? Um, I mentioned this a little bit before, but the doctors in Chinatown did also try to cover this up because they did not want the smoke, right? For good reasons. And also, let's remember at this time, there really wasn't a cure for this stuff, right? There was kind of supportive care and people did live, but it's not as if letting the authorities know would result in better care at all. They also, at this time, culturally, people in Chinatown, Chinese immigrants, did not want their dead cremated. The tradition here was to bury people for about 10 years and then ship the bones back to their hometown or home province to be buried in family mausoleums and things. So they also did not want bodies cremated. So I'm pretty sure I read in Marilyn Chase's book, they were sometimes smuggling them out just far enough so they could get them buried or on a ship or something. The only newspapers that were being honest about what was going on were Chung Sai Yat Po, which is the Chinatown newspaper, and the Examiner, which was her kind of tabloid newspaper at the time. So the Call and the Chronicle were caught conspiring with business leaders to cover up plague in California. The governor of California and some of the business interests would tell the news and they would report out like, oh, we're gonna clean it up. It's just being cleaned up right now. It's not a problem. So I have a good quote from Joseph Kenyon, who was the guy in charge of the medical stuff that was going on, that was in charge of containing the plague, I should say. And it's kind of about how people in California, the people in charge, cared more about the economy than the people in the city and their health. Here's the quote from 1900, and you guys should know I wrote about this. I did a series for Here Lies about the plague, and I did it back in 2020. So I was like real keyed into this COVID shit, right?
Wow.
And when you hear this quote, you'll see. It appears to me that the commercial interests of San Francisco are more dear to the inhabitants than preservation of human life. No sentiment has been expressed against a possible danger arising to the people, to their wives and children. These people seem perfectly indifferent whether or not bubonic plague exists in San Francisco, so long as they can sell their products and make large percentages on their investments.
I love the part about the wives and children. Like, think
Yes.
of the
Who
women
will
and
think of
children.
the children? Yeah. And in the meantime, Kenyon himself is trying to. This is kind of interesting. I kept this fact in here. It's a little random, but they had a code word to let the federal government know if plague arrived, and the code word was bumpkin. And just there you go, you guys. I don't know.
Wow.
He telegraphed bumpkin back to DC to alert them plague is here. Like, were people spying on like Telegraph? Like, was that their signal chat? Like, how are you going to intercept a telegraph? Right? It's not like I don't know. Anyway, code word. That's what they used. The governor of California and business leaders tried to cover up the plague reports. This is what Kenny was talking about. And they told the news organizations and the feds that they would clean up San Francisco in exchange for a news blackout on the plague. This was leaked to the Sacramento Bee, who then wrote about it, and it became national news. And now they could no longer deny that the plague was here in San Francisco.
Thank goodness for the Sacramento Bee.
Sacramento Bee. That was in 1901, and Kenyon was fired right after that. So he was kind of the sacrificial lamb. Meanwhile, the plague has busted out of Chinatown and is now spreading to North Beach and South of Market, what we call Soma. At the time, North Beach was called the Latin Quarter. If you guys are not from here, North Beach is our Italian neighborhood, right? It was called the Latin Quarter, and it was populated mostly by immigrants from Portugal, Mexico, Italy, and France. North Beach, geographically, it's right next to Chinatown, so it makes sense that it's spread there. The rats and the fleas just walked on over. It was also a poor and crowded neighborhood made entirely out of wood, which did not help. In 1901, a laundress living at the Hotel Europa in North Beach on Broadway died of plague. This next story is harrowing. In 1902, an Italian laborer picked up some old wood left over from a Chinatown cleanup. Do you want to guess what happened? He brought it home to use it as firewood, and his whole fucking family got the plague.
Oh,
Because
no.
there were fleas.
In the wood.
Yeah, fleas in the wood.
Oh.
That was 1902. That's a terrible story. In 1904, another Italian immigrant in North Beach caught plague, and it became pneumonic, which meant it could be spread through the air. It was in the lungs. So that spread to her family and killed her family as well. In Soma at the time, South of Market, it was closer to the water then, much like Chinatown and North Beach. It was closer to the wharves, closer to the rats. And it was an area where most of the dock workers and sailors lived. So there was a lot of exposure there. So starting in 1901, people start dying in Soma also of plague. In 1901, a sailor is staying at the France House, which all of these names are so fancy. It's like the Globe Hotel, Hotel Europa, the France House. These were like filthy tenement dwellings, right? These were like the SROs of the day.
Yeah, I was going to say, and some of the SROs now have kind of fancy names, and you're like,
yeah,
what
there's
are you
like a
trying
lot
to
of
pull?
Also, as we know, in terrible condition and not being taken care of by the housing authority in the city. So, France House got bubonic plague. He survived, but a garment salesperson in the same building caught it and died. And then also in 1904, a little bit later, a seamstress living on Natoma caught the plague. And I put this in here because she survived the plague and she survived a stint at the pest house, or what I think was the pest house.
Wow.
Marilyn Chase's book calls it the isolation cottage. And I assume it was one of the many sheds that were on the pest house property, Beth.
Right, right.
I looked for the source. There's no source noted, but that's where it was,
Isolation.
right?
I mean, talk about names that don't quite tell you what you're getting into. Isolation Cottage sounds so lovely.
Doesn't it? It sounds like it's on a bluff in Ireland overlooking the
Yeah.
seas.
Yeah.
It has no Wi-Fi and no television.
Somewhere you
No.
can take in the sea air and go swimming.
Yeah. No. This is a filthy, overcrowded, claptrap cottage that's also probably full of rats out next to the Hell Broth in Potrero Hill. So now we have you guys, if listeners have stayed through all of these episodes to this point, then they're going to appreciate my notes and the headline I have set up here on my notes outline, which says, white people are dying. That was, it became a problem. So in 1901, a couple white people have died. So they got to send in a new doctor to replace Joseph Kenyon. And the person they send in is a man called Rupert Blue, which is such a romantic name. The state forms the Public Health Commission, and they put him in charge of it. Right when he gets in 1901, arrives into town, right away, 3 sex workers die in a Japanese brothel on Washington Street in Chinatown. It is
Of
kind
plague.
Of plague.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to hear about the different. I mean, these are it specifically was a Japanese brothel with Japanese workers run by Japanese people. And one would assume Japanese and white clientele.
Yeah.
But it's in Chinatown. It's kind of interesting. Blue, we're going to get to our first plague lab, Beth. Rupert Blue set up a lab on Merchant Street, which is like this little alley that connects what is now the financial district and Chinatown in San Francisco. Scientists and doctors, they knew rats were involved. Like we talked about, there's dead rats everywhere when plague comes, but they did not quite understand about the fleas. They also had a real big blind spot when it came to their racial biases about who could get plague or not. This was actually, I know someone's listening to this being like, this is woke bullshit, but the idea that only Chinese and Indian people were getting this version of the plague held us back from understanding how the plague was actually transmitted. This cost people their lives, right? Because they would not let go of this idea that Chinese immigrants who ate too many vegetables were the only ones who were getting bubonic plague, right? I mean, we had a whole fucking pandemic in Europe. I don't know,
That is a strange thing to have forgotten, but it reminds me again of our conversation last time about HIV/AIDS and how nobody did anything until non-gay people were starting to get it.
Yeah, totally. So he sets up this lab. 1901, just to give some context of what's going on in 1901, that was a wild ass year. McKinley was assassinated, which I did not know that he was one of the presidents that was assassinated. There were labor strikes, there were riots, there was a mayoral election going on. Chinatown was a mess with plague, and there were also gang wars going on at the time. And then, now we have bubonic plague in the city. By 1902, 80 people had died. Chinatown were still trying to hide their dead. They were smuggling them out to Oakland or Sacramento to be buried. We have this new doctor, and he's like, okay, we gotta get this shit under control. We need a plan. And he did have an evidence-based plan. I think that the other thing is that once white people started dying in the city, they kind of were forced to confront the fact that it could affect everyone, and they needed to take measures that were citywide. They couldn't just focus on Chinatown. They had to come up with an evidence-based approach to treating it. So he did. He had a 3-pronged plan, which was to clean things up, right? Clean up the wood and the trash and everything, to treat it. We'll talk about how they treated it, and to surveil the population to make sure that they knew where the hotspots were, and they could address them right away. So they started first with Chinatown because that was the main focus of the infections at that time. They pulled down and got rid of all the old wood, like the old additions. There were balconies, there were sidewalk planks, there was just a lot of kind of like haphazard construction in the city where the rats were hiding and living in Chinatown. There were a lot of wooden cellars, which I don't really understand how a cellar can be made of wood, but they cleaned those up too. I imagine those were full of rats, right? Underground, made of wood. They used lime, carbolic acid, and sulfur pots to try to chase the rats out of the area and purify the air. I don't know that works, but
So sort of like a bug bomb, but for rats.
I guess like a citronella candle. They tried their best to kill all the rats. In 1903, they instituted a rat bounty, which gave all the little hooligans in San Francisco some good employment chasing and killing rats. They paid 10 cents per dead rat. It was mostly kids doing this work. They were catching and killing rats and bringing the rats to the lab on Merchant Street.
Were there any health risks involved for these poor youths?
I don't think anybody cared. There was no OSHA back then, Beth. We were 5 minutes away from like blaming all Asian people for the plague, so I don't think anybody cared. They would test these rats at the rat lab, the plague lab. The death rate started to go down, and even though they had, I didn't mention this earlier, but one of the plans that the city officials had was either to burn Chinatown down, sort of like Honolulu style. They also really wanted that land, like where Chinatown is right now that's like prime real estate, right? It's right down there by the water. You got the financial district. They wanted that land. So another plan they had was to relocate all of the people living in Chinatown to Angel Island and just kind of leave them out there.
Oh my God. And I'm shaking my head because this is the story
because
too.
It's a terrible fucking idea, first of all, but yeah, go on.
That yes. But also like this is why one of the reasons why we don't have any active cemeteries in San Francisco is because people wanted the land to build on. They didn't want to leave it for the dead to have their final rest.
They did not want the living to have this was
any opportunity to seize land from other people. More recently, look at what happened in the Fillmore when it was all redeveloped and all the Black people were like relocated somewhere else.
Which of the Black people who had come up in the Great Migration to work on shipbuilding in San Francisco that filled in the houses of the Japanese people who had been relocated to internment camps. So it's like a Russian nesting doll of terrible urban policy based on racism.
Yeah.
We should start like a little fucking tally of how many times I say racism in this episode. Okay. The next step. So the first one is clean it up, right? That's the first step in his plan. The next step in the plan is to treat it. So people are being isolated, pest house, right? They also set up an isolation facility on Fish Alley in Chinatown. I don't think that street still exists. I don't know. You guys can let us know. Is there a Fish Alley still? I don't know.
I haven't heard that name, but
me either.
I'm guessing that it was like where fishmongers were bringing in the catch and working and whatever.
Yeah. So they had an isolation facility there. There actually were some vaccine options at this time, but they weren't great. I'm not really sure. Plague is a bacteria, right? So it's now treated with antibiotics. But they did have these vaccines. The better one, there were two. The better one was called Yersin. That's the guy, Yersinia, right? Yersin's plague anti-serum. And it was made of antibodies grown in horses who had been exposed to the plague. So that one was effective, but it was very expensive and it was not readily available. It's kind of like, I guess during COVID, weren't they giving people antibodies or something? Am I?
Yeah, I believe so. But it also reminds me of the development of the smallpox vaccine, where
Jenner? Yeah.
first they noticed that the milkmaids were not getting smallpox because they'd been exposed to cowpox, and then they were starting to figure out if is there some way to get a cowpox kind of vaccine
Mhm.
that would help protect people against smallpox. So, I mean, we're grateful for animals for a number of reasons, but this is, I think, an important one.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's like an inoculation versus a vaccine. The other so-called vaccine was called Halfkins, and it was a total fucking disaster. This was made of heat-killed plague bacteria, which was much cheaper, but it was also minimally effective, and the side effects were just as bad as the plague. And it actually killed some people. So, if people had already been exposed to the plague, the Halfkin vaccination sped the growth of the bacteria and killed the patient faster. So, this one was not good, but you know
Great.
what? It was cheap. So, guess what they were pushing on everyone in Chinatown? I have last week we talked about the Cameron house, I think, Beth. Donaldina Cameron's house. Donaldina Cameron ran this, it was called the Presbyterian Mission House in Chinatown, and formerly it was called the Cameron House. She took in women and girls running away from sex work in Chinatown. There's a great book, I'll put it in the notes, about it. There is a story about a doctor chasing a girl, one of the tenants at Cameron House, a Chinese American girl, up the stairs trying to vaccinate her with the Halfkins, but she had heard about it. So she jumped out of a window and broke her leg. She survived to avoid it because she had seen what had happened. And there's kind of like there's a story that Donaldina Cameron herself did not understand. She was like, just take it. It's science. It's great. And then when she saw it, she was like, oh, okay, there must be like a reason why this girl is so afraid that she would rather jump out of a fucking window than take this alleged vaccine.
Yeah, probably saved her own life too.
She probably did. So those were the treatment options at the time. Some were good. One vaccine was good, one was bad. Also, they had isolation as an option. The third prong of his plan was to surveil the population to keep an eye on the disease. One of the things that Rupert Blue did was hire a competent interpreter to help him work with leaders and doctors in Chinatown and actually treat them like human beings and hear what they needed. And
What an idea.
what an idea. And honestly, this is actually revolutionary in this case. This was not happening before. This is like the first time, not the first time in the world, but like this is the first time anyone in San Francisco, any official bothered to like have an interpreter on hand to talk to the Chinese doctors and ask them like, what are you seeing? How many patients have you seen? Like, what do people need? So it established a better working relationship between Chinatown leaders and doctors and the public health authorities, which allowed them to work together and, increase reporting because they knew that they could trust this doctor. There's a really cool facility. It was called the Tunghua Dispensary. It was an emergency hospital that was established by the Chinese Council and the 6 companies, which were the benevolent associations in Chinatown. As I understand it, each association represents a certain geographical area of China, and they work together to be community leaders. The Tunghua Dispensary staffed traditional herbalists and Western doctors, and they worked with Rupert Blue to help treat plague in the area. That eventually became the Chinese hospital, which still operates in Chinatown today.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's kind of interesting.
That's nice history.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the Merchant Street Lab was collecting the dead rats, collecting stats, keeping an eye on where the rats were coming from and where the disease was spreading to. So there are actually 2 phases to the bubonic plague in San Francisco. There is the phase that we've been talking about, which is 1900 to 1905, which is when we're just realizing, that the plague is here. It's in poor immigrant areas like Chinatown, Soma, and North Beach. And then when we get to 1906, it's almost like something happened in 1906 to
What could that
totally
have been?
change the picture. All right, if you guys are not from California, it was the major earthquake, right? We had a massive earthquake in San Francisco.
Well, and it sounds like they didn't go through with a plan to perhaps set fires in Chinatown because of the plague, but a lot of that part of the city burned because of the earthquake. So
Exactly. So if you don't know much about the 1906 earthquake, it was really devastating to the city of San Francisco. And there was the earthquake, and then afterwards, the city burned for 3 days. I mean, a lot of San Francisco burned down. 3,000 people died. I have a note in here saying, Beth, what did they do with the bodies?
they would have all been buried in Colma because you could not bury in San Francisco any longer after
Oh, that's
1901.
right.
Yeah.
1906. Okay. Question answered.
Yeah, there are all these. I mean, it's one of the biggest mass casualty events that San Francisco has ever had.
Yeah.
And the people could not be buried in the city that they lived in.
Yeah. And I imagine in California in general, like
Yeah.
this is 3,000 people at least, right?
Yeah.
There's so the resulting chaos and wreckage of the earthquake brought the plague just like roaring back. There were refugee camps set up all over town. There were thousands of homeless people, and conditions were not super hygienic. And all kinds of diseases broke out in these refugee camps: typhoid, scarlet fever, measles, mumps, diphtheria, smallpox. And one of the refugee camps was at Lobos Square, which is now the marina. It's called the Moscone Playground now. And on that site, they built 700 flimsy wooden earthquake shacks. And there were 2,000 people living here. So this is not this is not Golden Gate Park. This is just like a playground now, there's like a baseball diamond there. There were a whole bunch of people living in wooden shacks. We love wood because so do rats. Wood, garbage, and sewage were a problem in this refugee camp, attracted rats and fleas and plague. 18 people died just in this refugee camp.
Can you imagine, like, your city has been destroyed, you are homeless, you're living in a refugee camp, and you get the bubonic plague.
And now you get fucking plague. Yeah. So Rupert Blue and his team stepped up their rat eradication efforts. First, they took the shacks in Lobos Square and elevated them onto stilts, which kept the rats out of the houses, which basically stopped the plague from spreading in Lobos Square. It's kind of cool, right? All they did was raise them up it's not even that much, a couple inches off the ground, so the rats can no longer come in. Then they opened what is probably my favorite historic location in San Francisco. It's no longer there. In the Fillmore in the Lower Haight, it was called the Rattery.
Yes.
This is the second plague lab, the Rattery.
We need something called that now. Just anything.
A bar.
A bar.
At the Rattery, they collected and tested rats for plague. People brought their dead rats here for their bounty. Again, we still have the bounty going. Overall, this is fucking wild, you guys. They trapped 350,000 rats. And they tested 150,000 of them. They're probably only testing the ones that look like they could potentially have plague. 150,000 rats in this building on the corner of it's like Fillmore and it's not Haight. I don't know. Down there in Lower Haight.
I'm trying to remember what the human population of San Francisco was at that time, but I think it's about 1 to 1.
Yeah. And once again, these are, it was mostly kids, I think, doing this, right? So the book, if you guys want to read Marilyn Chase's book, gets into like some of the methods they use to catch these rats. These kids are ingenious, right? So, this time also, they can't, the officials, the news, everybody cannot deny plague is here. It's back again. It's really bad. It's affecting everyone. It's clearly related to sanitation. And the city and the press were kind of forced to be really honest about what was going on and come up with an acceptable plan that wasn't just like, oh, quarantine Chinatown, So this began an era of cleanup in San Francisco. It was a large scale hygienic effort in the city. Garbage and other nasty shit had to be cleaned up properly if they were really going to get rid of all the rats and fleas and plague. Around this time, the Great White Fleet, have you heard of this? It was like the precursor to Fleet Week. There was this battalion or flotilla, I don't know. I'm not an army person. A tour of Navy battleships that was going around around the world, I think. And it was scheduled to stop in San Francisco. And that was going to be like a money-making opportunity, right? It's like Fleet Week. They have a bunch of sailors they need to feed. Like people are coming out to see it. And the feds told San Francisco, if you don't clean this shit up and get rid of the plague, the Great White Fleet is not coming. Like we're not trying to give all of our sailors bubonic plague. Like you have X amount of time to get this shit cleaned up. And so now now capitalism is allowed to do its work, Beth. Okay. The invisible hand of the market has stepped in to help us eradicate bubonic plague. Because these business leaders were like, we need this money, right? We got it. Okay, we'll fund doctors, we'll fund cleanup efforts, whatever you need, right? All of a sudden. So business leaders, corporations like Wells Fargo, Levi's, Southern Pacific, all the big guys were like, okay, what do you guys need? So they started funding actual cleanup efforts. And now is a good time to talk about Butchertown, which, Beth, as you know, Butchertown is another one of my favorite no longer existing historic locations in San Francisco.
So we should open a hipster butcher shop next door to the bar called the Rattery.
You would not want to eat at this historic butcher shop. It was so bad. It was so nasty. That's why it's like my favorite thing to talk about. We touched on it a little bit in our Pest House episode, but I'm going to tell you now. Butchertown was located roughly where Bayview and Hunters Point are now, along the water, roughly. And it is the part of town where all the slaughtering and meat packing was done. And it was hideous. You think it's gross when you drive through like Coalinga and you have to smell that cow shit for like 10 minutes. That was the whole fucking waterfront down there. There was no rules. It was rat central, obviously, right? The facilities, the meat packing and slaughtering facilities were built out over marshland, and the rats would just kind of live underneath the buildings on the marsh. The reason they built it out over the marsh is because when they killed and slaughtered these animals, the parts they didn't want, they just threw in the bay.
Of course they did.
Okay. In the bay, in Islias Creek, whatever they didn't want, blood, animal shit, offal, like whatever parts they couldn't sell, they just threw it into the bay, which I know you like to swim in the bay, but I was
I wouldn't have at that time. No.
How I do not fuck with the bay. Sure, it's clean now, but every time, like Margie was like, "Do you want to go paddleboarding at over there on that side, Crane Cove, they have paddleboarding now. And I was like, I'm not getting in that fucking water, Margie. And she was like, oh, you won't fall. And I'm like, first of all, I'm like super clumsy. I will fall into that water. And I know exactly what the fuck was in that water over there. So we have the EPA now, not for long, but we have it. So it's clean now.
Yes.
So there's just, it's Islayas Creek. We talked about that in the pest house. It flowed kind of through here and pulled all these like animal parts and blood and whatever into the bay with it. Now, the bay is tidal. And when the tide went out, thousands of huge rats would also come out to feast on what was left behind.
Happy rats.
Yeah,
happy rats.
That's why they were huge and fat, because they had a lot of food to eat. So fucking gross. Okay, this is like, they got to do something about this, right? Because now we have bubonic plague. But also I have a note in here that like really it took bubonic plague for people to be like, maybe we shouldn't be throwing cow blood and shit and parts into the bay. Like maybe these people shouldn't be allowed to just like throw their shit into the water that we all rely on.
Well, I mean,
go read The Jungle, everybody.
Going back to our Fort Mason episode, I mean, everyone just was throwing all of their garbage in the bay.
It's true. And they did this everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like most cities were equally as disgusting. So one part of Butchertown was called Hogtown, which I'm not even going to go there. And they had in what Marilyn Chase called an eradication stunt. So bad. If you're like a member of PETA, just like skip forward about 30 seconds. They poured boiling water on the rats to kill them. But hold on, it's not done yet. That just left a bunch of dead rats for the new rats to come in and eat.
Oh my God.
You want to get a pork chop from Butchertown, Beth? I don't think so. So at this point, the business leaders, so like, here comes Wells Fargo. And they're like, all right, that's it, right? We got to shut this shit down. We're not doing this. They got together and they formed this citizens health committee, right? And they put a lot of pressure on these places to clean this shit up. And I have a note in here that says that in 1908, Butchertown burned down. But I actually can't find the original source for that. So obviously it is no longer still there. At some point, someone was like, actually, we need this to be a super fun site. So we can't. The other notoriously gross part of town was Front Street Green Grocers Market, which is now near, it's like by the water. It's by Levi Plaza, kind of, in that area where all the creative agencies are.
Mm-hmm.
There still is, there's an archway in front of this park that still stands. I'll put a picture in the notes. That marks the spot where this green grocer market was. It was kind of like the original farmer's market. And all the stores would come here and the restaurants to buy produce, to sell, and to feed people. The vendors left tons of organic trash out there, right? So just like Butchertown, like if you didn't sell all your lettuce, you just threw it in the street.
Too many vegetables.
Maybe in this specific case, Beth, too many vegetables did cause the plague. Also, like, I'm just going to say this. They were talking about how at the beginning of the plague, how Chinatown is so gross and disgusting that it's full of rats. Meanwhile, they are throwing hog parts into the bay and massive colonies of rats are feasting on it. And then like over here on Front Street, they're selling vegetables full of rats. Like it was never about Chinatown, right? Like
no, the racism is always coupled with like
just nonsensical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So in order to get the grocers to clean their shit up responsibly, the Citizens Health Committee, this is interesting, ran a campaign that targeted women shoppers. And they were like, do you want to stop the plague? Then don't buy from these people if they don't throw their trash out. And they were naming and shaming the vendors who were throwing their trash in the street. They, this is kind of like also the start of kind of like restaurant inspection stuff. As we can ask Carolyn to weigh in on this, they would put a card in your window if you were not practicing good hygiene, and that was to alert the consumers that you were contributing to the problem of plague. They weren't worried about you getting salmonella from this restaurant, but if the restaurant was throwing their trash in the alley and not cleaning it up, it could be contributing to plague. And if you were a woman, you didn't want to do that. So
I have a
children.
story. I have a modern day story that this reminds me of. One of the city's neighborhood grocery stores is Canyon Market in Glen Park. And it was
Is this about the birdseed lady?
Yeah, it's about the birdseed lady.
This is so good.
The grocery store had to be shut down by the health department because they had so many rats. But the reason it had so many rats is because there was a woman in the neighborhood, possibly struggling with her mental health, who would dump like a sack of birdseed by the BART station, which is like half a block away, every day for the pigeons. And she was feeding the pigeons. But wherever you have seed, you also have rats.
Yes.
So the rats were just in the neighborhood, and when they ran out of birdseed, they would go over to the grocery store. And the grocery store could not keep them out. Like, they were having so much trouble keeping up with it because of this one woman who was feeding the pigeons.
One man plague vector.
Yeah.
One woman, excuse me. They should have targeted her with this campaign.
Probably good that we developed this strategy of inspections and health departments and all of those things. But wow. Yeah, still happening occasionally.
So, I remember that story, and I remember how frustrated everybody was. We're like, just don't let her buy birdseed anymore. And they were like, how do we do that? I don't know.
Yeah, every pet store in the city was like, we're not going to sell to her anymore, but then she would find somewhere else.
She went on fucking Amazon. Yeah. Jeff Bezos doesn't care. He's like, good, maybe I can raise that land and put a fucking AI server there instead. Okay, so we're going to talk next about eradication. We got rid of it, okay? And there's a couple of wild things about this story that I think, from a modern perspective, kind of crazy. First, that the plague never escaped San Francisco. As far as there were a few cases in the East Bay, but that's it. It never got out and spread all over California. As far as I know, San Francisco is the only place in the continental U.S. that had a plague outbreak, a bubonic plague outbreak.
Wow.
As far as I know, as we know, bubonic plague is endemic. It lives in, I hate to tell you guys this, chipmunks, prairie dogs, shit like that. If you go to Lake Tahoe today, you will see signs that say, don't touch the chipmunks because they carry bubonic plague.
Don't touch the chipmunks. I mean, that's the only reason, though.
Don't touch the fucking chipmunks either. You're going to get rabies. But so it did not escape the boundary of the Bay Area. And there was never another outbreak in the United States, which I think is very interesting. The second thing is, it's really amazing that more people didn't catch it and die. I mean, we talked about what the ideas for why that is, but I mean, 12 to 15 million people in Asia. And then at the end of the day here, my numbers that I have are from 1901 to 1904, or 1905, I should say, which is kind of that first wave of plague in the city. 121 were infected and 113 died. So high death rate, but also there may have been more because they were kind of hiding cases, suppressing cases. From 1906 to 1908, 160 people were infected, but only 77 died. So the treatment, isolation, surveillance, those things were working. The death rate did go down. And also by this point, there was less racism and less blaming and stuff like that. They were able to kind of like treat it scientifically.
Turns out when you abandon the racism that you actually help people.
You mean everybody wins?
Yeah, everybody wins.
Yeah, take a lesson, fuckers. So, and it's just kind of wild because like the historic numbers for plague are insane, right? Like millions and millions of people, like 1/3 to 1/2 of continental Europe's population gone, right? In like 2 years.
Right.
And
This could have
then-
been so bad in San Francisco, but somehow it wasn't.
Yes, and it could have spread all over in the United States and California, right? One of the things that the business leaders, people were worried about was even then were shipping a lot of fruits and vegetables out, exporting to other states, and it's like that could easily have brought rats and fleas into other states and spread. So it is, I mean, we don't know exactly why. I mean, obviously we did have better health, sanitation, diet, things like that. But I think that the point about the fleas being different has to be part of it.
It's like what we've been talking about with dengue down here is like the mosquitoes here or that are native to Mexico don't carry dengue, but mosquitoes got on a boat from Southeast Asia that got over here that do carry dengue, and now we have that to deal with. So I'm sure it's like similar. Which is crazy because bugs are so tiny. Like, how are they so different?
I'm pretty sure that like the mosquito is the most dangerous animal that's ever lived. Like the mosquito has killed more people worldwide than any type of tiger or fucking, I don't know, right?
I think it was on this podcast will kill you when they did their episode about malaria, that malaria has killed more people throughout history than people, like the people that are alive today or something like that.
It's crazy. Yeah. I know. So yeah, I guess same with fleas, except for like California fleas.
So I did mention that after the Marine Hospital in the Presidio closed, they did have a plague lab there. I was looking at the dates. I think it was like the 30s to the 60s, so the 1930s to 1960s. And after it closed, I wish I could find this, but somebody on Twitter reached out to me because they had been to a museum somewhere else in the United States where in the collection was a flea from the San Francisco plague lab that had been found on a bear.
Oh,
so the flea had plague, and they kept it in the plague lab, and then it wound up in this other health history museum.
Tahoe or something, bear, or like a bear in a zoo here?
No, here in San Francisco.
Oh, okay, that's wild. I mean, because I assume, if the chipmunks in Tahoe have it, I guess the bears could get it.
Anybody could have it.
I don't. Yeah. Yeah. I do you have any questions? That's my plague episode.
There's a lot of room, I think, for talking about the plague now and always. But one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, I'm like, this is a period of history in San Francisco where we learned so many things. Like we learned not to set dynamite to fix it after the earthquake because that'll cause fires. We learned raise your cabins up on stilts so that the rats can't get in. We learned
don't throw pig parts in the bay.
Don't throw pig parts in the bay. We learned like which early inoculations worked and didn't work. Like there's a lot of, failure eventually leads to success in this story, and I kind of love it.
Yeah, and also just like what a tumultuous era this was. Like there was a lot. I mean, obviously, it feels tumultuous right now, but there was like just politically a lot of violence, a lot of chaos going on in the United States at that time too, right? Like it was, I guess it was a good and a bad time for the plague to break out.
But I love that San Francisco kicked off the 20th century with the first plague coming to the city.
Yeah.
What a way to start.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That was super interesting. And as I said, I could talk about plague basically forever, but we got to give our listeners
back to it, I'm sure.
got to give our listeners a break at some point. So, yeah, thank you, Courtney.
Dead Reckoning, the podcast where death isn't the end of the story. Hosted by Courtney Minnick and Beth Weingardner, produced by Carolyn Kissick and Here Lies a Story, with art design by Dante Silliman. Our music is Act Calm by OTE. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Dead Reckoning on your favorite podcast platform, or email us at show@deadreckoningpodcast.com. You can follow Courtney at Here Lies a Story on Instagram and at Courtney Minnick on Blue Sky, and see more of her work at HereLiesAStory.com. You can follow Beth at Beth Weingardner on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Mastodon, and see more of her work at BethWeingardner.com.